Hey guys, we're your hosts Jess and Fenella, and this is Cozy Crime Club. Now, each episode we explore real cases from the eerie to the outrageous with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humor. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger, grab a blanket, and settle in. Welcome to the club. Welcome to our first ever episode of Cozy Crime Club. Yay! Now, before we get started into tonight's story, drink order. What's everyone got tonight? I'll go first. Cute little gingerbread man. I've got a nice lemon, ginger, and honey tea. What have you got, Jess?
Oh, I have the giant cup of tea, and it's just actually peppermint and spearmint, and possibly a bit of lemon.
Delicious. Love it. Tell me, Jess, what have you got for us this week?
So this week, we're jumping straight in. It's 1822, so go all the way back. We're in Van Diemen's Land, which is actually known as Tasmania. I don't have that in my notes because I feel like that's something people know, but I realize that maybe not everyone would know that. But Tasmania in Australia used to be called Van Diemen's Land a very long time ago. And so that's where we are
Wow.
today.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Oh, really? Van Diemen's Land was, oh gosh, and I don't even have like notes to back this up. Maybe
Oh my God. Google.
You can be, yes,
Toronto.
go Google girl.
Van Diemen's Land. First thing that came up. We're there, 1822.
Mm-hmm.
Take it away. What
All
happened?
right. So it is a raw and wild outpost on the edge of the British Empire. Mountains to the west, roaring ocean to the south, and nothing but punishment in between. Colonel William Sorrell was the lieutenant governor, and he was the man tasked with keeping order in the growing penal colony. So at the time, the population hovered around 3,000 in Van Diemen's Land / Tasmania. And Van Diemen's Land was still part of the broader Australian penal system, and convict escapes there were very common, though they were rarely successful. And the land itself certainly punished you if the law didn't. I just want to quickly stop there, and just because we were talking about Van Diemen's Land itself, just while Australia was kind of the big prison really super far away from everyone and everywhere. Now, convicts who were sent there, they escaped routinely. They escaped all the time, and they were sent to Sydney for trial. But that was very expensive and extremely time wasting because they had to take boats and all that such and ships. So Lieutenant Governor Sorrell, he devised a solution. Whether it was driven by loyalty to the crown or personal ambition, we'll never know. But it was efficient, and it was brutal, and for the colony it was highly profitable. Deep in the Tasmanian wilderness, Huon pine grew in abundance, a rare and rot-resistant timber perfect for shipbuilding. A booming industry in the early 1800s, as we can imagine. So Sorrell established a remote penal station where reoffenders and escapees would be sent, not just to suffer, but to work. Their punishment would fuel the colony's success. So the site he chose was called Macquarie Harbour, and it was one of the most isolated and unforgiving places in the entire colony. On the southwest coast of Tasmania, it was hemmed in by a jagged mountain range and dense, almost impenetrable rainforest. The only way in was by ship, through a shallow, narrow, violent stretch of water known as Hell's Gates, and the name certainly says it all. Inside that harbour was a small island. It was 8 hectares of barren, windswept rock. There was no fresh water, poor soil, frequent food shortages. Dysentery, scurvy, starvation were all part of daily life. The officers might have lived marginally better than the convicts, but even they weren't spared the misery. This was Sarah Island, and it was hell. So if you can imagine arriving by boat, you survived like that ocean crossing and the vicious tidal channel just even to get in there. You're chained, malnourished, and exhausted, and ahead of you is cold rain, and there's no real shelter, almost no food, and a guard who sees you as like little more than what they say would be a beast of burden. So you're surrounded by freezing water, and beyond that, if you somehow escape, you have wall-to-wall rainforest. There's wild rivers and brutal weather, and there's few supplies. Certainly no roads or anything like that, and there's no hope at all. Although men did try to escape from there. In fact, during Sarah Island's 11 years of operation, more than 150 convicts attempted it. That's over one every few weeks. And it speaks volumes. The life they were running from was worse than whatever they were running into. And even years later, long after the station had closed, historian John West describes Sarah Island as a place of degradation, depravity, and woe. And it's here, in this nightmare of a place, that one of the darkest stories in Australian history begins. This is the story of Alexander Pearce, a man who escaped Sarah Island, and what he had to do to survive. Before we meet Alexander Pearce officially, I just wanted to share something with you that kind of helped me better understand the world that he was walking into. On my shelves at home, not these shelves, but I have a big bookcase that's kind of like cracking under the weight at the moment. But
You
like,
and your library.
I know.
Yeah.
So on the shelves, tucked away behind the usual titles, I found a strange, forgotten book. It's called The Sarah Island Conspiracies. It's a fictionalized account, but it draws heavily from the real diaries of a shipping clerk he was only known as GK, the initials GK, and he was sent by the Hobart Commissariat to report on the convicts and conditions at Macquarie Harbour. He was there at the same time as Alexander Pearce. There's something about the way that people wrote back then, raw and vivid and unfiltered, and GK's words don't just describe what he saw, but they really feel it. They pull you into that time and that place and that misery. So there's an entry here that describes the second voyage to Sarah Island, the same one according to most accounts that brought Alexander Pearce there for the first time. And this is what he wrote. What I found on arrival is a filthy outpost of lost souls, living in the kind of squalor one might expect among the most benighted of savages. I have never experienced such misery and anger and sullen hatred as I find among these outcasts. Quite different from the savage violence of the previous visit, welling up from some dark region of their soul. So some of these entries from the shipping clerk at the time, so he was a real person, a shipping clerk. It's kind of a fictionalized account of that, but it's taken, there's like little pictures all in it of the actual entries would have been in, ink in the 1822. So it's very cool. But next thing he goes on to say is the military at the time, that's who ran the prison, the penal systems are all run by the military because there wasn't police at that time, or that was the correctional process, the way they did it. So the military were convinced in Sarah Island, it's super, super isolated, and they were convinced that there was going to be an uprising by the convicts. And without firm leadership, fear has led to brutal punishments, clearly irregular for offences little more than imagined gestures or defiant looks. But most of these men were too sick to revolt. The clothing, food, and medicine were sent from Hobart, were lost to theft or rot and the cruelty of the climate. Dysentery, scurvy, and infection have reduced them to wrecks. Some flee into the forest in groups of 3 or 4 to escape the violence, only to return starved, frozen, and face even harsher penalties. And others never return at all. And finally, he wrote, there is not on the whole island one building which could be described as truly habitable. Even the commandant's quarters were mould-ridden, with cracks and holes stuffed with rag and oakum to hold out the wind and rain. Fires, even essential in midsummer, sputter and smoke. And that is the world that Pearce is sent into, as we were just kind of talking about before. And soon he would do anything to escape it.
That's crazy. Oh my God.
I know, it's hard to imagine. Let's get on to our protagonist, Alexander Pearce.
Let's do it.
Okay. He was born in Northern Ireland in 1790 to a Catholic family. He was short, blue-eyed, he had brown hair and pink, pockmarked complexion. Through his early years, he scraped together work as a labourer until one day he was caught stealing 6 pairs of shoes. Pearce was sentenced to 7 years transportation to Tasmania, or as they knew it, Van Diemen's Land. So he stole 6 pairs of shoes and he got 7 years. So I don't know. I was kind of thinking how did the judge rationalize this? Is it 1 pair of shoes per year? And then he's like, can I give you 1 to boot?
Oh my
But, if the judge or we had a sense of humour, Pearce probably wasn't laughing. And the only way to reach Australia was by sea. The voyage took 6 months. And none of that counted towards your sentence. I actually looked it up because I was like, surely
What?
that horrible time, 6 months, yeah, it doesn't count towards your sentence, which really, so it's kind of like you get your sentence plus the 6 months. And, your punishment began only if you survived the trip because not everyone did. It was, a lot of scurvy happening and just, it would have been horrendous. He arrived in January 1820, which in Australia would have been a lovely time. I mean, that would have been summer and they're probably just like, hell yeah, it was like nice, warm weather and sunshine would have been great. He arrived on board the Castle Forbes, was the name of the ship, and he was about 30 years old. Within weeks, he was sentenced to work duty, and it didn't take long before the lash found him. I have a bit of a timeline of his recorded offences because he was a bit of a rebel. He just,
Oh.
yeah. So in May of 1821, so he'd been there about a year, his recorded offence was embezzling 2 turkeys and 3 ducks. And he
This guy's a thief through and through, isn't he?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was his gateway into this life. Now he embezzled the 2 turkeys and 3 ducks. He got 50 lashes. And just on the lashings, I was reading, I think it was on Sarah Island, but they probably did this kind of everywhere when that was the punishment. With the lashings, they would make the other prisoners do it. So they would make them do it. And if they didn't do it hard
Good
enough,
enough. Oh my God.
they would get lashed. And it was, I know,
Oh
it's
my
just like, it's
God, that's
kind of like,
crazy.
I know, it's kind of like psychological
It
torment too,
is.
because then you have to live with these people that you had to do that too. So I know. So that was May. This is all 1821. So that was May. September, he was drunk, disorderly, and absent from his lodgings. He got 25 lashes for that. In November, he was drunk again, and this time he stole some wine. He got 50 lashes. And also in the same month of November, he stole a wheelbarrow, another 50 lashes, and he got an additional 6 months in the chain gang.
In the
The
what?
next chain gang.
The chain. Oh my God, this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Nothing deters him. He's just like, it's
He's
fine.
like,
I'm an opportunist.
give me that booze, give me the embezzled
Literally.
ducks. So the final one, May 1822, this is that following year, he escaped into the woods and he forged documents. He was found to have forged documents and he escaped. So that's when he was transferred to Macquarie Harbour Penal Settlement or Sarah Island. They're like, okay, we're done with this guy. He is going to the worst, most isolated place. He's going to Sarah Island. So when he arrived, it was winter, and Macquarie Harbour Station had only been running for 6 months at the time when he arrived. And roughly a month later, while working on as a part of a timber cutting party, Pearce and 7 other convicts overpowered the guards and fled. Their plan was originally to steal a boat and sail north to the Australian mainland or a nearby island, but the plan fell apart fast, and they were forced to head inland straight into the heart of Tasmania's untouched wilderness. Our escapees were Alexander Dalton, who was recorded as being a soldier, Thomas Boddenham, a farm labourer, William Kennelly, a cooper, which, side note, I had to look up because I didn't know what a cooper was, and that is a barrel maker for anyone like myself that didn't know. Matthew Travers was a labourer, Edward Brown, a waiter and a glover, John Mather, a bread baker, and Robert Greenhill, he didn't have a trade recorded. I couldn't find it anywhere. And Alexander Pearce, so 8 in total. Now, on the first night, they made it to the summit of a nearby mountain. They were absolutely exhausted, freezing, and terrified of being spotted. So they chose not to risk having a fire, and they lay there in the dark, cold to the bone. Progress was agonizingly slow. It's kind of hard to describe how thick and dense, and horrible this place was, but I did find in 2008 a group of experienced bushwalkers. They attempted to retrace this escape, and just one section of the journey, it was 1.1 kilometers, and it took them 12 hours to get through that same terrain.
Oh my gosh.
Longer than a
Wow.
shift at work, and you were just walking a kilometer. And they did it from the same location. So I thought that was pretty wild, just to kind of understand just how hard it was to get through. The group managed to bring a few days of rations with them, and they just had one axe. Not knowing how long their journey might take, they agreed to ration the food carefully, and each man was aware that miscalculation could be fatal. So the region it's now a World Heritage National Park. It covers about 10% of Tasmania. And while most people think like of rainforests as being warm and lush, this one definitely isn't. It's cold and it's wet and almost always raining. So the nearest town, Strawn, averages just 15 clear days per year. So it's gross. I mean, I would love it because I like that kind
It's
of.
gross. I'd love it.
Yeah, I would. I love that kind of, because it's nice to be
A
cozy. But
winter
then these
girl.
people, yes, but these people are not cozy, I guess. They're roughing it, to put it lightly. So if you imagine it, it's freezing rain, thick bog, it's mountainous terrain, and picture 8 starving men dressed essentially in rags. There's no map, no shelter, and no real idea of what lay ahead. Would you have stayed imprisoned and endured the hunger and the brutality and disease, or and served out your sentence, or would you have risked it all, your freedom, your life, and stepped into the wilderness? What would I have done, or what would anyone do in that situation? Now, the men, so there was 8 of them. They survived their first night, but just barely. As the days dragged on, the rain never stopped. Their clothes stayed wet, and their firewood stayed damp. Every night was freezing. Their rations, already limited, were dwindling fast, and sleep was rare. Progress was certainly slow. Several days in, their clothes were shredded, torn apart by the undergrowth as they climbed and crawled and pushed their way through the dense, dripping rainforest. On the 8th day, so they've been just over a week since their escape, they woke to find 3 of the men missing. At first, they called out, they searched, and they tried to make sense of it, but eventually it became clear. Alexander Dalton, William Kennelly, and Edward Brown had turned back. They chose the lash over starvation, the chain gang over whatever waited out there in the forest. That decision alone tells you how brutal the journey had already become. So we've got the remaining 5. We have Alexander Pearce, Bodenham, Mather, Travers, and Greenhill. They pushed on. They moved in single file, hacking a path through the endless bush. Only one man held the axe, which was Robert Greenhill, and with it he began to command not just the path forward, but the hierarchy within the group. By day 15, their rations were completely gone. The terrain had beaten them and their bodies were failing. They reached a river, a barrier too wide to cross in their condition. So they stopped. They sat, and they just stared at the water. And someone, no record says who, posed the question: what if one of us dies so the rest can live? They drew straws, sticks most likely. One of those little pieces of wood held the power of life and death. I don't know if you can imagine staring down at those sticks and knowing that one of them is just going to decide whether you eat or you are eaten by the group.
That's insane. That's so
I
intense.
know, but I feel like they're so beat down at this point that
One of them's probably just pick me.
exactly.
Yeah, literally. Oh my God, that's so wild.
I know. Well, Thomas Bodnam drew the short straw. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He was too far gone. Robert Greenhill lifted the axe, and Bodnam was killed swiftly. His body was divided between the 4 remaining men, Pearce, Greenhill, Travers, and Mather, and it bought them a few more days, maybe a week. And this is where things begin to fracture. Greenhill, still in control of the axe, had clearly appointed himself the leader. He and Travers had a strong bond. They were friends. They were transported together, punished together, and now escaping together. Greenhill had been sentenced to 14 years. Don't know what he did. I tried to find it everywhere, and it was just an unknown crime. No surviving record of what he did back in England, only that he was supposedly a tough criminal and that he had left behind a wife and 2 children. So Pearce and Mather, perhaps sensing that friendship was now protection for them, began to drift apart from the other two. The group of 4 quietly split into their 2 little sections. So days later, it's been roughly 3 weeks since they've escaped. The sun came out. It was a rare moment of relief. In a small valley, the men lay sprawled out, soaking up the warmth. Mather, desperate to eat something, anything, boiled fern root in a tin pot and wolfed it down. Soon after, he began vomiting violently. Whether it was from the plant or maybe the human flesh still rotting in his gut, who knows? While he was doubled over, Greenhill saw his chance. He crept up behind Mather, axe in hand. But Mather turned, saw him coming, and lunged aside. The 2 men struggled, Mather fighting for his life and Greenhill fighting for his next meal. Somehow Mather overpowered him. He tore the axe from Greenhill's hands, and that changed everything. The trust was completely gone, and paranoia had certainly set in. And in the silence that followed, each man began to ask himself, who's next? So by October, the weather was slowly beginning to improve. The men were not. Their bodies were failing and their minds were worse. After the altercation between Greenhill and Mather, the group pushed on. 2 days later, they made camp for the night. One thing was clear. Greenhill and Travers were on one side of the fire and Pearce and Mather on the other. Mather thought that Pearce had his back. He didn't. Pearce had quietly made a deal with Greenhill, and that night, while the young Scottish baker slept, Pearce took his chance and held Mather down while Greenhill took the axe and killed him.
Okay, things have taken a sharp left turn. We need to back up the bus. I was not expecting this.
I don't even think they were thinking rationally at this point. I'm going to save myself. And
Yeah.
so now
my
there's 3 of them.
gosh. Yeah.
Started off with 8, but now there is 3. So Mather's remains kept the men alive for several days. Which I'm just like saying that, and I'm like, I cannot even imagine like eating someone. I just like
Over
there's no.
several days or just in general? Like, do you
Yeah,
mean
look,
over
it's the
time?
no refrigeration for me.
Yeah, I mean,
It's the
yeah, same. I
so
mean, it's a wet and disgusting environment, if we're honest, ripe for, I don't know, bugs or something, you know?
and like, how would you carry it? I mean, because they're on the run. They're trying to get to like Hobart or some kind of civilization to get a ship, their original plan, and hightail it out of there. So they unfortunately killed him, and his remains kept them alive for several days. So it had been around 4 weeks since their initial escapes. They'd been on the run for a month. But Travers was bitten by a snake on his foot. Travers was the best mate of Greenhill, who held the axe, the
Oh my
leader.
God.
So poisonous, agonizing. I'm sure people know about Australian snakes. They're always super poisonous. His foot swelled with infection and he could barely move. He begged his companions to leave him, just let him die in peace. But Greenhill, his closest friend, knelt beside him, said, "We're in this together. We won't leave you behind." They waited 5 days. The foot turned purple and black. Travers drifted in and out of delirium. Eventually, Greenhill helped carry him, crutching him under the arms, forcing him onward through the mud. That night, Travers woke to a sharp jolt of pain. He looked over and saw Pearce and Greenhill whispering, heads low. He knew what they were planning, and he begged them again, "Please don't kill me, just go, please." And Greenhill promised him again. He soothed him like a brother. Travers finally closed his eyes. That night, one of them killed Travers in his sleep. The original group of 8 had been whittled down to just 2. So it had been about 5 weeks since they've escaped the settlement at this point. Greenhill and Pearce were gorging themselves on their 3rd dead comrade. Their stomachs were full for 2 days when they reached the top of a mountain range. They had basically crawled and dragged themselves to the summit. Their clothes were torn to shreds. They were nearly naked, without any shoes, and covered in septic wounds. But when they reached the top, they saw it. Open land. Smoke rising in the distance. Civilization at last. Their joy was overwhelming. They raced downhill, following the smoke, but when they arrived, they found not a town, but a small Aboriginal camp, about 50 people. Pearce and Greenhill had encountered Indigenous groups before. They knew them to be cautious, often avoiding outsiders. Desperate and half mad, the two men ran in screaming, weapons raised like wild berserkers. I'm pretty sure from what I read, they obviously still had the axe, and I think another one had grabbed like a club, but they just ran in there wild. The camp scattered. They were really scared, and the two convicts stole everything they could. Kangaroo meat, cooked food, gorging themselves before fleeing again. But the next day they realized they were lost, and their vow of brotherhood broke. With no food left and no sign of rescue, the two men turned on each other. Tense, silent, watchful. Greenhill still held the axe. Pearce kept his distance at night. I'm just trying to imagine how hard it would have been going to sleep at night, just knowing what Greenhill had done in the previous weeks. The anxiety would have been so real. Bye, sleep. Nice knowing you.
Yeah.
Never sleeping again.
Literally.
But, they ended up coming across another small Indigenous camp. This one was smaller than the previous one, but once again, they just charged in there screaming. This worked last time, so the camp fled, and the convicts feasted on everything they could grab their hands on. So the success that they had eased their tensions, but not for long. One night, Pearce woke to find Greenhill standing with the axe. He pretended to wake from a nightmare, panting and panicked, and Greenhill froze and lay back down. Pearce knew it then. It was only a matter of time. So he began plotting. Each time Greenhill looked ready to strike, Pearce would fumble, and accidentally interrupt the moment. He played the fool. But behind it all, he was watching and waiting. Finally, as Greenhill slept, Pearce crawled up to Greenhill's side. He slowly pulled the axe from beneath him, and in one clean blow, split his skull open.
Oh my God.
So
Fair
Pearce
enough.
yeah. I mean, yeah,
At
he had
that
been
point, yeah.
the leader the whole time. But Pearce
Yeah.
was finally alone now. I don't know, fair enough. I don't know. Greenhill doesn't seem like a great character, but I don't know. It's survival at the end of the day.
It's you or them.
Yeah.
And I guess if you see an opportunity, you didn't escape for nothing, you wanted to survive, right? Jeez, just thinking about it, it's not great.
Mm.
They're not
And I
faced with
think
good choices.
no, they're not. And I think the lack of hunting, it can't do it. I mean, Indigenous people obviously had been here for a long time, and they know how to survive. They know what fruits to eat, what plants not to eat. Where they started their escape, which was the whole reason the prison was there, is because it was so inhospitable. And I mean, if they had enough provisions, I don't think any of these men would have killed anyone else in the group. I don't think that's what it was about. Like what we were saying, it's, it was survival at this point. And unless you're in that position, it's really hard to know what you might do.
Yeah, totally.
But he had got to this point, I think it had been close to 2 months. And by this point, he was closer to civilization. Certainly he was out of that real thick wood, horrible area. So once he killed Greenhill, which surprised me. I wasn't ready for that when I was researching it. But fortune, it kind of smiled on Pearce after that. He, after these 6 weeks of just madness and violence and starvation, he started catching animals, and like what we were just talking about, but he had got to kind of more of open areas where animals were. He caught ducks, a lamb, and, enough to keep him moving. He was emaciated. He was filthy and covered in sores and wounds, but something drove him forward. One day, picked up a familiar sound, but it felt foreign to him at this point. It was the sound of a dog barking. He hadn't heard it
Wait,
in what had felt like
what?
a century. And then a click, a musket cocked behind his ear, a voice. Don't move, or I'll blow your bloody brains out. Pearce turned
Oh my
slowly.
God.
A shepherd stood there, gun raised, pointing directly at Pearce's head. When Pearce told him who he was and where he'd come from, the man lowered his weapon. He was stunned that anyone could have made it this far from Sarah Island. Then, in an odd act of mercy, he brought Pearce to his hut and nursed him back to health. A week or two passed, and one day the shepherd left, heading for Hobart Town. He told Pearce to stay put. This part I never really understood. I'm not sure why he didn't want to bring Pearce with him. I'm not sure if he didn't trust him or, he just wanted him far away from him while he was telling on him to the authorities, reported him, because I'm assuming that he was going to Hobart to tell people that Pearce was there. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't know the rest of the story, but just my 2 cents. It sounds like maybe he's protecting him. Is that something that crossed your mind? Maybe like he's like, don't show your face, don't follow me, because then they'll just. Because why would he nurse him back to health and then skedaddle? Wouldn't he? But obviously, there's more story to come, so don't mind me.
I think
Yeah,
you could be
okay,
right.
carry on.
I think I couldn't find the information anywhere, but maybe he was going just to get provisions, But a few nights later, so Pearce was alone in the hut and the shepherd had gone. Pearce was preparing an evening meal when he heard a low whistle outside the hut. He froze. Cautiously, he opened the door and found 2 dark silhouettes standing in the dusk, muskets raised. They weren't soldiers. They were bushrangers, escaped convicts like him. Their names were Ralph Churton and William Davis. Pearce invited them inside. They shared the fire and the food. Over dinner, the 2 outlaws made their pitch. Join us. They had a hideout deep in the forest, provisions, weapons, and even livestock. Pearce didn't hesitate. He knew the noose was coming. If this was the way to stretch his freedom a little further, he would take it. So another 6 weeks passed. Pearce was living among the bushrangers in their camp, a pair of crude huts nestled deep in the bush, guarded by a stockpile of firearms and 180 stolen sheep.
Like a real farm kind of situation.
Yeah, but they're kind of all on the run.
Yeah. That's wild. That's cool. Okay.
Well, occasionally they did raid remote farms, looting food and supplies, whatever they could carry. It wasn't a life, but it wasn't chains. Then one warm afternoon, while the 3 men lounged beneath a tree, the bush rustled. Before they could react, they were surrounded by soldiers from the 48th Regiment, a patrol hunting for escape.
Just so invested in their freedom now. They've got the sheep and everything.
So before they could react, they were surrounded by soldiers from the 48th Regiment, a patrol hunting for escapees. The bushrangers scattered. Davis was shot in the thigh, and Churton and Pearce surrendered. In irons once more, Alexander Pearce was marched to Hobart Town. The date was Saturday, January 11th, 1823. Pearce had been free for 113 days. Now the 2... I know that's such a... I think
13 days.
No one had done this before. This was heard of. So the 2 bushrangers, Davis and Churton, they were tried and hanged 7 weeks later.
Oh, God.
Swift justice. Like Van Diemen's Landed, don't mess around. But Pearce, he wasn't tried at all. When he confessed to cannibalizing his fellow escapees to survive, no one believed him. Authorities assumed he was lying to protect them. So they sent him back to finish his sentence, back to the hellscape of Sarah Island. Now you can imagine how the convicts back at Sarah Island reacted. To them, Pearce wasn't a criminal, he was a legend. He had done the impossible. He'd escaped Macquarie Harbour, crossed the wilderness, and lived to tell the tale. How he survived was irrelevant. He was proof that it could be done. One inmate in particular, a young English labourer named Thomas Cox, transported for life, was in awe, and despite knowing the grisly truth, he persuaded Pearce to try again. So they escaped. 9 months after arriving for that second time, Pearce and Cox slipped away from Sarah Island.
Oh my gosh, this guy, he's tenacious.
He is. That is I feel like the
Damn.
perfect word to describe him. Now,
Crazy. Go on.
5 days after escaping for this second time, a passing ship, the Waterloo, spotted a man waving from the shoreline. The crew rowed ashore. It was Pearce. He told them Cox had drowned crossing a river. They tied his hands and searched him, and in his pocket they found a piece of human flesh.
Suspicious.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Pearce later led soldiers into the bush, where they found the mutilated corpse of Thomas Cox.
But then why bother saying that he drowned? This guy, he's all over the place. I have some kind of weird respect for his tenacity, but like at the same time, he's a bit
I think a
cooked.
lot of people do. It's a mixed bag for sure. So the commandant, Lieutenant Cuthbertson, questioned him. "Tell me, Pearce, did you do the deed?" "Yes, and I'm willing to die for it." Pearce was taken to Hobart Town and tried for murder. To the public, he didn't look like a monster. He was short, around 5'3", with a wiry, athletic build. He was clean-shaven, alert, and calm. In June 1824, the Hobart Town Gazette noted he didn't seem weighed down by the burden of human blood. But Judge John Pedder, a man not easily shocked, was horrified. At the trial's conclusion, he declared, "This case is too inhuman to comment upon." Before his execution, Father Philip Connolly heard Pearce's final confession. Pearce told him he was tired. After killing Cox, he felt empty. He was done, and he was ready to die for the atrocities he'd committed. At 9 a.m., July 19th, 1824, Alexander Pearce was hanged, and he was 34 years old. So however you interpret this story, whether Pearce was a cold-blooded predator or a man broken by hunger and despair, you can't deny this. Alexander Pearce found deep inside himself a will to survive that defied nature, morality, and even reason itself. Whether he was a monster or just a mirror held up to a monstrous system, that's for you to decide.
That's intense.
So that was the case of Alexander Pearce. Let us know what you thought about it. We want to hear. We are the Cosy Crime Club. Let us know down below. Isn't that what they say?
Give us some cozy comments, guys.
Please.
Let us know what you thought of the first episode. Well, thanks for getting cozy with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review, share the club with a friend, or comment below. You can join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. And until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.